stage, and we are joined now by Cynthia Frelund of the NFL Network to talk a little NFL draft. Cynthia, how are you this morning?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
Oh, it's a fantastic day. We're just all happy, just happy, joy. Appreciate you taking some time. I know it is pretty hectic over there. Is anything going on today? I mean, how's the morning so far?
It's great. I woke up in my home state, which I don't usually get to do, and there's something going on here. People are actually tailgating outside of my window already.
That's incredible. I love it. That's incredible.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at a man in a Cowboys jersey, which in a Michael Irvin Cowboys jersey, which is.
I gotta say,
okay.
the people that come to watch the draft are the most interesting type of fan to me, because you're watching like 3 minutes of your team and you are just decked out. I love it. It's incredible.
Who doesn't like seeing grown-ups in face paint? I mean, come on.
Me and Rory, who's the Lions mascot, we're like really good friends. And by really good friends, I mean I tweet at him and he tweets at me. So it's really great.
Maybe so. The whole Irvin and Dallas thing. Maybe they thought that the D that the Tigers were stands for something other than Detroit. Do you think maybe they're confused? A little inebriated this morning or something?
I think these people are hoping to. I think these Cowboys. There are Cowboys fans everywhere, and they're crazy. I'm also seeing now. Okay, at least now I see a Lions jersey, which makes more sense. These people are rolling suitcases. Like we are doing things right around here.
Yeah, that's the best part to me is people actually travel to just random locations to watch people read names. And listen, I'm gonna camp out in front of my TV and do the same thing. So no room to judge here. But I love it.
Cynthia, I gotta ask you something, because this just came up with the NCAAs and the host sites, and we were talking about Detroit. And I said quietly, Detroit has done a really good job with, the city renovations and their projects where they've kind of rebuilt and redesigned the downtown area. It can't be coincidence that the draft was on the horizon in 2024 when this first started a handful of years ago, because that city is vastly different if you've been there the last 4 or 5 years.
I mean, since 2008, Detroit's made a big comeback. To me, that whole grit thing from last year, which was basically the mantra of the team, that really embodies the entire city. I'm sitting at a renovated hotel right now that is very, very cool. I would say the name of it. I feel like there's a safety concern there, but I'll say the name next time I'm on. But it's a really cool renovated hotel that's just really kind of I would highly recommend this to anyone, and it's beautiful, and there's just so much shit. There's a lot of excitement around here. I'm really excited. All the sets look incredible. Detroit's really done it right. I keep telling people I want people to leave here loving Detroit as much as I do.
That's awesome.
All right, Cynthia, let's jump into the nitty gritty here on draft day, round number 1. The quarterbacks are the big story, right? And I'm sure we'll get to them in a second here. But I'm curious who you look at as a guy that has tremendous ability, because there's always that guy, people are like, oh, this guy's a can't miss, but he's going to go 12th in the draft because of positional value. Is that Brock Bowers?
Maybe. I mean, the interesting part, that was not where I thought you were going when you started saying that question. But I think that right now the value of a pass-catching tight end feels really big. But, I mean, would you say Dalton Kincaid was that? Because I don't know. Would you say Kyle Pitts was that? I don't know. And that's kind of how we felt about at least Kyle Pitts prior to the draft.
Yeah.
A lot of it is dependent on where people end up and how they're used. And I would say with tight ends, you need to give it a couple of seasons to figure out, because the college game translated to the NFL game is very different, and defenses operate differently. Even if you look at the number of times a defense plays man versus zone defense, it's just going to be different. So I don't know if there's any such thing as a can't miss, but I do think following the trends that seem to be working in the league and adapting play to, take advantage of the way the modern rules and the whole nuances of the game work, I do think that's important.
So, Cynthia, I got to ask, where did you think I was going? Because now I'm curious.
I thought you were going to, it's funny because I thought maybe O-line, because this is a very prolific O-line class.
Sure.
To say that, I would say we could easily, the record right now stands at 8 offensive tackles drafted in the first round. And I do think we could see that record broken in this draft. So I thought you were going to say maybe a Joe Alt, which is a left tackle, obviously, or, maybe even like one of the less sexy names. He went to Notre Dame. So is that sexy? I don't know. But, it's ultimately, I thought that's where you were going.
Nothing says sexy like Terre Haute, I'm telling you. Cynthia, when you're talking about record breaking, and I get it, like at the top, Neighbors is making a push. Harrison Jr. has one of the highest draft grades in recent memory, but it doesn't appear to be like a 2004 draft, even though, the Michael Jenkins and the Rashawn Woods, Reggie Williams, the guys at kind of the second half of that draft maybe didn't elevate the top. Do you see the depth? We just were joking about a guy like Keon Coleman, who's not going to be a first rounder, but could be a really good pick for some. When you look at the top end for wide receivers versus the depth, do those two things, do they mesh for you?
Well, I guess our perception of that is colored by where someone is drafted. Keon could go in the first round. I think it depends on, like, if some weird things happen, like the Titans go wide receiver, then I think we could see a little bit more of a run on them than offensive linemen or something, of that nature. But I think there's like a lot more flavors of wide receiver in this one than maybe we've seen in recent years, because, NIL, we have the confluence of NIL, the transfer portal, all the rules changed, everything's different, all that's happening. And then, oh, by the way, we still have a bunch of people who, within the COVID rules, they, played an extra season, so they're kind of old. And then we have some young. Like, this is a weird year for a lot of that stuff. So I'm looking at all of this and I'm saying, if you want to get a wide receiver that you think is going to fit your team, you better know exactly what you want, because they don't all do the same thing.
For you at the top, because now it almost seems like, and maybe some of it is on Harrison Jr. for not doing anything since the season, but Neighbors seems to have closed the gap. If nothing else, is it running after the catch? Is it catch radius? What's the primary difference between 1 and 1A of let's say Neighbors and Harrison Jr.?
Well, I think part of it is, if you kind of track the quarterbacks in this, you've seen Jaden Daniels have this massive uptick in people's interest as well. And you know who he's throwing the ball to? Malik Neighbors.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that when people were watching a bunch of Jaden Daniels footage, they also watched the guys who he was throwing the ball to, and it started to become more of a, is it more chicken or egg? Meaning, is it more the guy throwing him the ball or the guy catching the ball? So I would say that, Malik is a wonderful receiver, but I don't have him graded any differently now than I did at the end of the season. And I don't care that Marvin Harrison Jr. Didn't do anything he didn't need to. So I'm kind of glad he didn't, frankly.
Yeah.
We're talking with Cynthia Frelund from the NFL Network. Cynthia, when you're looking at teams, it seems like we have a pretty good idea what the first couple teams are going to do. Where do you start? What point in the draft do you start to think this could become a real wild card? Is it at 4 with Arizona maybe wanting to trade out, or where do you think this thing could kind of get off the rails?
I actually think you could start at 3. I think the Patriots, they were, it depends on how much of an influence the ownership has on picking a quarterback, because I actually think that they don't just have one need. They have many needs. So they'd be smart to think about trading down, not even that far. They could probably trade down. I don't know. I mean, I'm not suggesting the Giants would trade with them or make for a quarterback. That's kind of a weird one in terms of like historical,
right?
Like Giants and Patriots, whatever. But, they could potentially look at something like that. That could be a way to stay in the top 10, but kind of maneuver and get an extra pick from that, like a legit extra early pick.
We had the opening segment and I said, I get it. Like, quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, but who could really throw a monkey wrench in this thing is the Patriots, because then all of a sudden, let's say the Patriots, because they do have a lot of needs. And that's what we were talking about in our first segment. So that all of a sudden puts teams like the Raiders, Denver, San Diego, Minnesota, if they do something unexpected, that's going to get all those teams' attention, and they all have a pick in the first 13 spots. Like, it could heat up in a hurry if they throw a curveball.
I kind of hope they do. I mean,
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
So I'm into it. But I also think, like, unless ownership is really influencing it, you don't really get a chance to reset after a coach like Bill Belichick. Like, we don't really see that because there is no other Belichick. I mean, Parcells, whatever. There's a few times when we've had such prolific coaches, but maybe take the moment. To me, you're probably not getting fired in 1 year, like let's let the teams that are more on the hot seat make the get pressured into having to develop a quarterback day one. Like, their O-line isn't one that I would want to stand behind at this point, right? So, there's just a lot of things there that, I don't know, maybe it's not sexy, but they're also in a really, really hard division. It's not like the Bills, I know they traded Stephon Diggs, but they're not taking their foot off the gas. Are you kidding me? Aaron Rodgers is back, just in case anyone forgot about that. And the Dolphins, they're also really good. So, if there was ever a time to sort of take a beat, this could be it. Again, not sexy, but I have no problem saying that because those people have a lot of things to be happy for from, 10 years ago.
Okay, Cynthia, let's talk about trading back for a minute, because I know all the studies and all the numbers say that trading back is the smart thing to do. You get more assets, you make your team in general better. If you're in a spot, though, where, let's say, Drake May is there at 3 and they believe Drake May is that dude, he is that guy, like, at what point does that balance shift from, hey, we need a lot of talent and we've got a lot of holes to fill, to, hey, we've got an opportunity here on a guy that we think is generational?
I mean, if you think they're generational, you take them. You don't mess around. You don't get cute. If you have questions as to whether it's generational, I'm kind of more of I like the philosophy of, like, unless there's no certainty here. Sometimes you need more. All the studies also show that if you take more more picks, you do better because
margin of error
of being right. Yeah, exactly.
So, Cynthia, let me ask you some hot take, or you could see this happening. Earlier, we were talking. I said, you know what? The more I get into this, and it started with my thought process about what New England could do a couple of weeks ago, because I was totally with you on the New England, the shakeup thing. Could you see where 4 quarterbacks don't go in the top 10 like many had projected up until now? Because I think that's a thing now.
Yeah, I do think if that were to be the case, we would end up with 4 because someone would trade back into the end of the first round.
See, that's what
Because if you think about it, like, even the Lions, who
top 10,
I would be surprised if they don't pick, because it's, like, hard not to pick in your hometown when all these people are, like, excited for it. But, like, there are a bunch of teams picking in the 20s where if their guy isn't there, and Brad Holmes did such a good job in free agency that they don't have, like, a specific need and they don't need a quarterback. So if this other team comes up and is like, let's say the Raiders want to come back up and do something crazy, right? Like, that would be a prime position to do it. So if it doesn't happen early, I do think we see some at the back half because, remember, if you drop the first rounder, you get that option for the 5th year of their rookie contract, which is becoming increasingly more valuable.
Cynthia, I'm curious, when you look at some of these teams that feel like they're close, right? Whether it is I don't know if the Giants feel like they're close, but teams in the back half of the
that's an easy one.
That's fair. But teams in the back half of the first round, teams like the Bills, teams like the Lions. I know obviously you're a big Detroit fan, but you mentioned trading back out of that first round. If you feel like you're close, does it make more sense there when you really might only be a piece away from kind of getting yourself back over the top?
I mean, I'm looking at the Bills for this one because they have a lot of needs and at key positions: corner, wide receiver, pass rusher, expensive positions. So if you're looking at position expense, it's like your quarterback, obviously, and then like your pass rusher / your left tackle. Then you have to look at your wide receiver and your corner. So those are the 5 most expensive positions. So if you have needs at those positions and there's a guy there that you think could be the right one, I don't think you risk it and trade down, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're like the Lions, where you have some positional flexibility, you just paid your wide receiver 1, so you don't need to go find that. Of course, it'd be nice to get a few more complementary pieces, perhaps some younger guys with some speed, et cetera. But you could probably get that in later rounds. So you have to know yourself well enough to know if you can be in a position to trade down, or if you're better suited just to take, by the time you get to 20, the marginal difference between the second round, you don't earn a lot more picks for that. Like, you're moving in the top 10, you earn there's significant equity. You get so many more picks. But if you're moving down at the 20s and late 20s, it's just not that different. You don't get that many. It's not like you're netting yourself a first round pick somewhere.
Cynthia, when's the last time you remember a team that had such a good offseason that they could go without a first round pick and people think about them as a legitimate Super Bowl contender like the Houston Texans?
Well, I would say my caveat there is that Will Anderson or CJ Stroud, one of the two of them you could consider as a first round pick this year.
They did get the two, right? Bang, bang.
Yep. So you now know who they are. You know what I mean? Like, if you can afford to pay for things like a nice Stephon Diggs moment or all of the trades they did in this offseason, and you're in their division, like that was some really smart maneuvering. Now, in 3 years, are we going to have some different questions for them? Absolutely. But that's just where they are in their trajectory, right? Like, that's going to be, it's just going to be different based on, always that rookie quarterback contract. You've got to take advantage of it.
When you're looking at potential top half the draft guys, and obviously we may only get one defensive guy in the top 10, who do you think has kind of suffered the most from people maneuvering with all the offensive talk and quarterback shuffles that's sitting there defensively that's probably going to be better than where he may be picked? Because I'm seeing some guys now that have Verse out of the top 10, and I'm like, really? I remember when it was a fight between he and Dallas Turner.
who's Verse out of the top 20?
Who's the defensive guy that you think is suffering from all the pre-draft talk?
I think my favorite name in the draft, but also a guy who fits the bill for what you're asking, is Chop Robinson from Penn State. He doesn't have the explicit numbers that some of these other guys like a Verse have, but and of course not Turner, but what he does have is a true pass rushing capability. Some people think he's a little bit undersized. I don't know if I believe that or not. Aaron Donald was pretty good, and he was considered undersized. He doesn't have a lot of versatility in the run game, but much of that is resume based. He wasn't really asked to stop the run, so it's not that he performed poorly in it. It's that he just didn't do it. So it's like a hole in his resume, not a negative thing. But in this point, we're going through such a fine-tooth comb that any difference like that becomes a major one.
All right, Cynthia, we got to get into quarterbacks now because I want to. I am having a really hard time looking at anybody outside of Caleb Williams and convincing myself that I don't like Michael Penix just as much as any of the other guys that we've been talking about. Am I crazy?
No, I think Michael Penix is probably amongst, when I talk to GMs and all the people I've spoken to this past week, they're like, you guys did not talk about Michael Penix enough. You downgraded him too much. I think both he and Bo Nix, people were like, they put them in that third tier. So it was I would say JJ McCarthy's been the biggest riser. Jaden Daniels, big riser too. Bo Nix sort of got relegated into that third spot. And then there's a line in the sand, and then it's Michael Penix and Bo Nix. And I don't know if that's true or not, but a lot of the people I trust and whose opinion I think actually is very, very smart, they say things like, yeah, I think you're looking at Penix and you're undervaluing me. This guy, he throws the fastest, hardest ball, which is kind of like Josh Allen. He's done it. I think part of the reason was he had an injury in the past, but then he's been healthy for quite a while. I like Penix too. I think this is where it comes down to flavors, right? Do you think you can work with it? He's not the same type of quarterback him and Bo Nix are quite different. So there's a lot of sort of, again, flavors with that, but I think he'll be a Raider.
I'm unapologetic Steelers fan, and I got to stay in the Keystone State here because Roseman is so aggressive, and people are kind of forgetting that the Eagles roster is not too bad, especially if Hurts bounces back. How interesting would it be? Because I could see a team like Philadelphia really shaking things up because they just strike me as the type of organization that would be looking for a reason to keep or get rid of their coach, right? All their chips appear to be pushed in. Could you see the Eagles being a player in the first round at 22?
It's certainly possible. I feel like they would. I mean, they're in that fortunate position where they need some stuff, but they don't. But one of the things they need, interior O-line, that's going to be one of those things that gets pushed down to early second. So I don't think they're going to have to go up to get this is a really strong O-line class. So I would guess they're probably not trying to move into the first. it's entirely possible for the right deal, but I don't know who would be trading down at that point that would be a good trade partner with them.
All right. Again, the aforementioned Steelers fan, I'm not used to their free agency activity. Khan has definitely been a shakeup. They strike me as a team that's going to make some moves as well. Maybe get a Sutton or an Ayuk or somebody, pry some teams away with their picks. Do I need to get ready for a different kind of Steelers team as they approach these next couple of years?
I don't know. I mean, I think what the Steelers have always done is they don't listen to anyone else. They have their own way of thinking. They know what a Steeler is incredibly well. You've seen it by the results that Mike Tomlin's had, even with guys who on other teams have been not nice guys or hard to work with, right? He's made these people assets as opposed to liabilities. So I'm not worried at all about that part. We may not understand it as outsiders, but I do think like this is going to look different, but not because the Steelers' identity is different, but the pool of available assets from which they're drawing is different than it has been in recent years.
More apt to be involved in a draft day trade, Ayuk, Lockett, or Cortland Sutton?
Ooh. Sutton, because I think that the Broncos just need to figure out quarterback, and I don't think Zach Wilson's the answer.
How about that move, though? Is that just Peyton's confidence, or you can get him on the cheap for a second with no strings attached?
It's why not?
Yeah.
It's totally like, to me, it's a flyer. There's no harm in that. If he turns out to be great, cool. If not, no one will remember it. It's not. I mean, remember that he's paying for the sins of a weird trade to get
Russell Wilson
a couple of years ago.
Cynthia, since we brought up Brandon Ayuk, and by we I mean DB, when you're looking at paying a guy like Brandon Ayuk $20+ million a year over multiple years, at what point do you just say, hey, I can get 80% of his production with maybe with a second round guy of Keon Coleman or some? I know there are different types of players, but at what point does that equation start not making sense anymore?
When Kyle Shanahan's not there?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a better answer than that.
That's it. There's a couple of people like Justin Jefferson. Like, you better get a guy that can sling it if you want any sort of value with re-signing him in Minnesota, right? It's complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. It's less complicated when you're that team and you've got Christian McCaffrey and you've got that. It's like they have a vision. They know what they want. So if someone fits their vision, then I believe them.
Hey, one of the best in the business, Cynthia. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.